one more, if I may. Well, my biggest thoughts, or I don't know if it's a concern, I guess it's a concern, is the 50-year, 100 years down the road as Moscow continues to expand. And you indicated that you think that with this land use ordinance change, that there actually would be less dense as far as subdividing. Did I understand you correctly?
In the Moscow area of impact, which we're not currently considering, because currently in the Moscow area of impact,
sure,
we have the 40 acre.
Okay, so I guess my concern then would be, first of all, is expanding the area of impact, looking at a 50 years to 100 years down the road, because what I would be concerned, and on the face value, this looks pretty complicated. I suspect it's not as complicated as it really looks, but as Moscow continues to grow and we have these areas currently outside the area of impact, that they do their own developing, they have their own infrastructure as far as septic systems and wells and so on and so forth. But then the area of impact eventually expands. Moscow expands the city limits, and subdivisions become grow in those outside areas, and they grow around these pockets of development that are already there. And these areas are annexed within the city, but we have those folks that have already got their own piece of earth there, so to speak, and they don't want to be annexed. And so we end up with an island, and we have a couple of those in Moscow right now, that only through forced annexation, which we don't like to do, can we incorporate them within the city of Moscow. So I guess my question to you then would be, what do you foresee many years down the road as Moscow's ability to expand into the area outside the area of impact? Did any of that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah. And what I would say to you is, without further analysis, like Gary had indicated, I couldn't tell you exactly the number of parcels. We're talking about probably at the maximum, and this was an estimate, about 64 new parcels or so, I think is what the number was. And that was additional to what would be allowed. I suspect, given the policies of the city of Moscow, where they prefer to have areas have master plans as they expand and annex, that would probably resolve a lot of the issues, but it just isn't something that we've had a lot of discussion about.
Thank you.
Walter?
Thank you, ma'am. 2 or 3 questions, if I may. Gary referred, and I think Michelle can answer this, but Gary referred to the January 197 parcels. Am I correct that that is land? If a parcel existed in 1197, owned by Wayne, and in 2003 I bought it, it's still a pre-existing parcel regardless of ownership?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, was there public comment at your June 4 public hearing?
Yes, there was.
And the preponderance of that was?
Generally in favor of the ordinance.
Okay.
The people, especially in, well, actually everywhere in the county that testified, with the exception of maybe 3 people, was generally in favor of the ordinance. We had testimony that the people liked the idea of allowing more houses, but sticking to the goals of the comprehensive plan. There have been a lot of testimony. I think we have people in some rural areas that are waiting, because we have people with very large parcels that currently simply can't get any divisions on them. There are areas of the county, about a third of the county is unmapped currently, so it's considered all productive. And so we have people with 120-acre parcels that have no ability to even split off 5 acres for a family member. And so we have a number of people that testified that they would very much like the ability to do that. They also perceive that the way the ordinance is currently applied based on soil types really isn't fair to people who just simply don't have soil types.
Go ahead.
And my final one, somewhere in my mind, I remember, maybe in your comp plan, maybe not, but maybe just in the newspaper at some point in the past 10 or 20 years, that Latah County wanted development to occur near existing cities. Is that in the comp plan?
It is.
Then does what is being proposed by your planning group fly in the face of that if it would preclude the city of Moscow's expansion over Wayne's 50 to 100 years?
I don't think that it would. I don't think that
Why not?
you're asking me some hard questions, Walter.
Not as
No,
hard
they're
as
good.
not as
They're
hard as me
good.
trying to understand what all this means. 'Cause
No,
I've never been on
that's right.
P&Z.
I think that I think that the opportunity to transfer building permits gives the ability to actually enhance locations around existing cities for building sites. Our comprehensive plan does state that we want building near existing cities. On the flip side, sometimes, as Bill pointed out, building around existing cities can be inappropriate if it's not planned well. And again, I think with the way that the annexation process works and the master planning that's typically done whenever you're annexing a large piece of property for development purposes, which is often what happens, especially with the city of Moscow. It doesn't happen that often with other cities in the county, but in Moscow it does. I think that that would probably address the concerns the city had while also being able to accommodate the goals and policies of the comp plan and the people outside of the area of impact. I don't know if that really appropriately answers your question.
Enough that can't think of a different question to ask about that, but I have got one more. I asked Gary this earlier today. This talks about 40 acres, 160 acres, less than 10, et cetera. How do we in the city of Moscow do subdivisions now where we have 30, 40, 50 lots in a subdivision? Is all of this language written except for subdivisions?
Yes.
Okay, that probably, that's probably the only thing I've understood tonight. Thank you.
Tim?
Thank you. Michelle, if you would, please. Has the county planning commission considered the possibility or considered the idea, concept of Moscow expanding its area of impact? And if so, can you relay the general feelings of that group?
What I can say is they haven't specifically considered the city of Moscow expanding the area of impact. They are under the understanding that on a regular basis, 5 to 10 years, depending on how things go with the city and the county, those things need to be reviewed. There may be areas of the city where the city is expanding that would warrant expanding the area of impact. There may be other kinds of reasons for the city to want to expand the area of impact. And I think that the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners, I don't really want to speak on their behalf, but I would say that they're under a general understanding that circumstances change, things always could be renegotiated, especially when it comes to areas of impact.
Am I to, and this is an assumption on my part, I'm hoping for a correction if necessary, if the city's area of impact expanded before this ordinance went into place or at the same time, wouldn't that slow up some of the lot division, potential lot division?
I don't see how it would, because the current regulation we have for the city area of impact is the 40-acre rule, where you can split any segments of 40 acres on your property in addition to one small parcel division. And so if you expand that out, you're going to rapidly enhance the number of divisions people would be eligible for. Without actually calculating all the numbers, I couldn't tell you if it's a wash or if it's going to be more. given the size of the parcels in the area of impact, my inclination, and adjacent to it, my inclination would be that you would actually have more potential divisions and building sites under that code than you would under the proposed code.
And if,
Please go ahead.
well, when I sat on the Transportation Commission, I know they were very interested in connectivity and how roads and streets end up past the city limits and where they're going to be. And so if the area of impact increased, it would give the city an opportunity to help develop that planning.
Potentially,
Yeah.
yeah. Although I would say that even if the area of city impact didn't increase, that the city has done transportation planning outside of the area of impact already. And again, that would just be an item for negotiation, because even if it's not in an area of impact, comprehensive plans could be negotiated. The issues that you run into with transportation planning outside of city transportation planning is that in our county, we have a separate transportation department that has a separate elected board that essentially makes all of the transportation decisions.
Okay, Tom?
Well, I see sort of a discrepancy between the official legal area of city impact and the actual or real area of city impact. And a couple of examples, if I can get this thing to work. Oh, okay, there we go. Is this little thing right here that squirted out into the county? And then like this stuff that squirted out a really long time ago. There's, I mean, it's difficult for us to do orderly planning for the city when stuff like that happens and just goes out there and kind of, it makes it hard for us to do, say, transit planning and road planning and a lot of things like that. So I personally would like to have us figure this out so that we try to get some reality, some ground truthing between the legal area of city impact and the actual area of city impact.
I would state that Canterwood Estates on the north was in the area of impact at the
when it
time
was-
that it was approved, and the city had full authority and had the final decision on that. So the city actually
And I wasn't on the
approved that
council at that point.
development.
Yeah. We want it back, is what we're saying. We want it
Yeah.
back. And one of the points about that is that when someone came to P and Z a few years ago and wanted to, had a parcel that attached to Canterwood and wanted to develop it, everyone from Canterwood came in into a public hearing going, you can't do that, the road's not wide enough, it's too busy, da-da-da-da, you gotta do something about it. Going, it's a county road, it's not a city road. And so that's.
Highway District,
What?
Highway District Road.
It's
Well, that's
not
the-
a highway.
It was not a city road.
Not a city road.
We weren't responsible. It was an S-no my job. Anyway, point being that that's what you run into. And if, I don't have any problem with however many subdivisions you want to do with your own personal property, as long as the right-of-ways and the space for all of the infrastructure that is going to come at some point, that there's room for it. I'm hearing shared driveways. That gives me the willies, because not necessarily are shared driveways bad, but where do you put the infrastructure? And we have had sewer districts go bad and then be adopted by the city. And when those kinds of infrastructure things happen, and of course, when you eventually expand and have to put in public sewers and not deal with the wells and the septic tanks,